We continue our look at the historic Passion Week leading up to the cross and ultimately the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So let's consider the fourth thing that Jesus put his hand on from the cross. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Thursday. We have already read in Matthew chapter 27 where Jesus reached out while suffering on the cross and placed his hand on the sun, snuffing it out for the 3 brightest hours of the day. He also placed his hand on the sanctuary, ripping apart the veil that separated man from God. Yesterday, we saw how Jesus placed his hand on the stones and caused an earthquake to bring him glory and honor, since man was suddenly silent about praising him, so the rocks cried out. Well, today, I want us to consider how Jesus placed his hand on the sepulchres of the dead in Jerusalem. Now, Jesus was surely known for his power to heal the sick, the lame, the blind, even the demon-possessed. Now, Jesus has been seen calling Lazarus out of the grave after he had been dead for some 4 days. He also raised Jairus' daughter from the dead after the mourners had already begun their work. So it should not be a surprise to us that Jesus can actually raise the dead from their graves and their sepulchres. I'm sure that this would be a shocking look for so many to see the graves opened up that day. You know, we consider a cemetery a place of reverence for those who have passed from this life. It's almost as though you should be silent or at least quiet, subdued in a cemetery out of respect. I mean, we certainly would not desecrate a grave or a memorial stone in any graveyard. So what was it like on that day that Jesus hung on the cross and yet he placed his hand on the graves? The Bible says in Matthew chapter 27 and verse 52, "And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many." You know, in the midst of his death, he brought back life to so many within the community of Jerusalem. Here we are talking about saints that certainly those in the city would have known and remembered. Not only were their graves opened up, but the people that were once deceased are now walking in the streets of the city. You know, Paul gave his testimony to King Agrippa in Acts chapter 26 and verse 26, saying, "For the king knows these things, for I am convinced that none of this was done in a corner." Nothing escapes his attention. I think not done in a corner is really an exaggeration about how the events were seen during the crucifixion. I mean, after all, the midday darkness that they experienced, the extreme conditions of nature, the earthquake, can you imagine those seeing a deceased friend or a loved one again walking on the streets of your city? I mean, some natural phenomenons can be explained or at least understood that supernatural powers work in this day beyond our control or our understanding. Some things like a tornado or an earthquake. But we do not see the dead risen in a natural way and walking among the living. This is the storyline of horror films, perhaps, or at the very least some science fiction movie, maybe The Walking Dead. So the only explanation of dead people walking the streets was that Jesus Christ reached out from the cross and called for an extreme show of his power as he changed the course of history. This was the day that man murdered his maker, and yet he was still performing miracles in broad daylight for everyone to see his power.